Good morning, everybody. My name's Andy Walker. I'm an infrastructure and construction journalist, and welcome to the final session of this second day of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. And this session is going to be focusing on the grid, the modern grid, building resilient systems for a cleaner future. Many thanks to our sponsors for our week, who are Cundall, Epicam and Vattenhall Heat UK, for their support for this event. This session is going to be examining the crucial need to modernise the grid and the interplay between energy and transport in building a sustainable and resilient future. We've got an excellent panel who will be taking questions after they've given an initial introduction. And if you want to put a question to the panelists or make a point, then use the question facility, which should be on your screen. It's denoted by, I think, what looks like a speech bubble with a question mark in it. And if you post it in there, then I'll relay your questions or points to our panel. And that panel is, we'll be speaking first, David Boyer, who is Director of Electricity Networks at the Energy Networks Association. And he's going to be outlining some of the current focuses and achievements of Britain's network operators in modernising the grid. Then we have Peter Ridge, who's Associate Director of Power at the engineering consultancy, multidisciplinary consultancy Cundall, who are also one of the sponsors of our week. And he'll be talking about the importance of collaboration, a big theme that's come up during the course of these first 2 days, collaboration across industries and sectors, and introducing his concept of joining the dots. Now, that was a massive issue in the last session, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what Peter's got to say about that, because we do need more joined upness in this particular area. And then we've got Professor Phil Blythe, who's the director at DARE. And for those that aren't aware, DARE is the National Hub for Decarbonised, Adaptable and Resilient Transport Infrastructures, who are doing some absolutely essential and brilliant work around these issues that we're discussing. And Phil is also former Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Transport, so a very knowledgeable individual, as all of our panelists are in this second session. And Phil will be talking about some of the challenges posed by the electrification of various transport modes, and he look at some of the concerns involved in all of that as well. Without further ado, though, I'm going to move to our first speaker, who is David Boyer, who is Director of Electricity Networks at the Energy Networks Association. David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andy, and good morning, everyone. Great to be here and keen to listen to and help with any questions in the Q&A today. A few just quick thoughts. I'll try not to stay too long at the start around networks focus. Clearly, modernization of the grid in support of our economy, our energy needs, and in particular decarbonization. Networks are central to that, and networks are very, very focused on the need for modernization. Several just kind of personal anecdotes. When I joined the industry, it is fair to say that networks do have a very significant modernization task. When I started, most of the assets were fondly referred to as battleship grey boxes, which they were actually literally painted with battleship grey left over from World War II when they were first installed. There was very little data and monitoring or automation. We joked about, for the engineers, if there are any, most network sites which have red phase amps would be like one of hundreds of potential data points but there'd be very limited data with which they could manage a modern grid. And there was very little decentralization. There was no renewables. There was a list of a handful of generation sites at connected distribution level that was all CHP and backup diesel. And that was all there was. And that is very much already not where we are at today. Huge volumes of generation are decentralized. The networks are some of the most reliable in the world here in Britain, and that's driven through huge programs of innovation, focused on automation and power electronics to get the power on more quickly, and modern approaches to investments as well. So there's huge programs that have strides that have been taken already, but a lot of work left to do. Current focuses, for the networks, first and foremost, in a modernization program, investment is clearly a big overarching need. The investment in network operations and expanded capacity is increased every regulatory period, and in this period, sets of periods, it's 43 billion pounds going into the networks, which is more than ever before. They run a huge program of innovation because we know the solutions, the approaches, the technology we have today won't get us to net zero. There's over almost 2,900 innovative projects that have been registered and delivered by networks across their programs. The Strategic Innovation Fund is a fund of over 450 million pounds just in that one area. And in terms of some of the impacts and focuses that have already happened, flexibility markets, non-build solutions that engage with flexible and modern products. Again, Britain's networks have one of the largest markets for local flexibility services in the world, with over 4 gigawatts of flexibility services contracted in the last year alone. That's more than a Hinkley Point C worth of capacity that's being managed through modern approaches. Currently, connections, grid access to grid capacity is a huge focus. You'll hear lots and see lots around the scale of that challenge, but also there's significant reform work going underway to address that and get customers onto the network that are ready. And increasingly, we have recognized the need, and you'll have seen publication yesterday from the NESO around making sure that the projects that are needed that support a clean power system in 2030 are prioritized to get that access. So those are big changes, those are big reforms, and a big focus for all the networks. And just finish by saying, I heard in some of the previous sessions today, the strategic approach to all of that, with the creation of the NESO, the creation of the RESPs, and the right understanding of what's needed for the system to get us there, that gets replicated down into implementation, reform, investment, etc., is also a really big overarching focus throughout that. I'll stop there, and I'm happy to jump into the discussion.
Thanks very much, David, and really pleased that you mentioned that strategic approach, because that's something that's coming through loud and clear, and I'm not sure we've actually got that completely right on this issue and a number of other issues that we've been discussing this week. I think our next speaker, Peter Ridge, Associate Director of Power at Cundall, who are also one of the sponsors of our week, so grateful thanks to them. I know we'll have some views on the whole strategic approach and this whole question of having a more joined up approach, which I think is absolutely critical if we're going to get this right. But I know that Peter has some very interesting views on that question, and I'm going to hand the floor over to him right now. Peter.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today to discuss these vital topics of energy security and green infrastructure. First of all, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a design engineer by trade, biased towards electrical engineering with over 20 years of experience now across multiple sectors, including healthcare, workplace heritage, mixed use, more recently sort of data centers and the energy sector. Cundall, we are a global multidisciplinary engineering consultancy with sort of over 27 offices around the world and around 1,200 employees. So our sort of area of expertise and interest span sort of demand side. So we design energy efficiency buildings and hyperscale data centers, focusing on demand reduction and operational efficiency. Supply side, we engage in distributed energy generation and storage projects, which includes battery storage projects, solar farms, hydrogen production, carbon capture, peaking plants. That's both sort of behind the meter and in front of the meter. We do other things as well, like master planning, sustainable cities and metropolitan areas, integrating energy storage solutions at macro level. So our sort of unique position allows us to work across both ends of the energy spectrum, predominantly at the demand and distributed generation end, but it does give us a holistic understanding of the energy landscape. We collaborate with a diverse range of diverse range of clients, from sort of large landowners to energy-intensive industries to public sector organisation and community groups. So yeah, we talked a little bit about joining the dots, which I guess in lots of ways is simple in concept. It just goes a little bit beyond. Today we talk a lot about whole system thinking, which is good, and that's the right way we should think. And I think the joining the dots is really actively connecting diverse elements. So including technology, policy, regulation, stakeholders, and customers to create innovative solutions for the modern grid. So some examples. Data centers, that seems to be quite topical these days, especially because they're very large demand. The hyperscale data centers that we used to design were sort of several hundred megawatt, which to be honest still blows my mind somewhat. But we've now far surpassed that. We're on to gigawatt campuses now. We've designed hyperscale data centers achieving sort of PUE of sort of like around 1.1 or even lower. For those unfamiliar with that term, that's like a metric to measure energy center efficiency. The lower number indicates a higher efficiency. We do that by utilizing free cooling or efficient plant selections and smart design, which is significantly reduce the energy consumption. But these designs not only, of course, cut the operational costs for our clients, but they also minimize the environmental impact and pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But we also recover the heat from these data centers as well and redirect them to, for example, one scheme in Europe to a nearby hospital. These initiatives provided sustainable heating for the hospital and reduced energy waste, showcasing how sort of cross-sector collaboration can lead to mutually beneficial solutions. So joining the dots is about recognizing that every industry and segment of society has a crucial role to play in shaping the future of energy as sectors evolve and decarbonize. The energy demands increase, or particularly a lot of strategies are towards electrification, and I think that really is meaning that most sectors are converging towards the energy sector. It's almost in a collision course, I'd say. So by integrating solutions like distributed generation and storage and waste heat recovery, demand side response, etc., across various industries, we can address these growing demands while promoting sustainability. So yes, we do need to build a bit more infrastructure, but we do need to improve energy efficiency, of course, and we definitely need to find better ways to utilize the infrastructure capacity that we already have. So whilst fully joining the dots is a challenge, and perhaps we haven't connected them all just yet, this is what we need to work towards. So I really believe that by collaborating across disciplines and sectors, actively connecting technology, policy, stakeholders, customers, we can accelerate the development of a resilient and efficient modern grid. And this grid will contribute significantly to society's broader goals of energy security and sustainability. So I just want to finish really by saying I believe that we have no competitors. I think the demand for skills to design, to influence, to build, to manufacture tomorrow's world is much greater than we have in supply. So we have only partners and collaborators. That's it for me. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to an engaging discussion.
Thanks very much for that, Peter, and we will, I'm sure, drill down into some of those questions during the course of the discussion. Our next speaker in this session is Professor Phil Blythe, who, as I said, is Director at DARE, which is the National Hub for Decarbonised, Adaptable and Resilient Transport. And I know that he's going to highlight some of the challenges posed by the electrification drive of various transport models, and also maybe highlight some of the concerns regarding the current electricity supply and distribution systems and their potential impact on the resilience of transport infrastructures. So, Phil, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Absolutely delighted to be here. As I say, my name's Phil Blythe at Newcastle University, and I'm running this DARE hub on behalf of the UK Research Councils and the DFT. And it's interesting because everybody's looking at decarbonisation, which is a really important part of future transportation, but not so many people considering how do we adapt the systems we have to deliver transport in the future with the challenges of climate change, and also making that transport infrastructure and the systems and services that run on it more resilient. And obviously, one of the key policies and one of the key drivers of transportation at the moment is electrification, and particularly electrification of road transport. If you think that something like 28% of domestic CO2 emissions come from the transport sector, the domestic transport sector, and of that, almost 90% of them are road transport. Therefore, the low-hanging fruit for government has always been the decarbonisation of road transportation. And we're moving towards that. We have our targets of 2035 that you can't buy any new diesel or petrol cars, and by 2040 you can't get plug-in hybrids. Now, that means that we're going to have a great reliance on electricity. We've got to make sure that electricity is available in the right places at the right price, and that it is resilient. And I think one of the dichotomies of electrification is obviously it delivers on zero tailpipe emissions for vehicles, but it does beg the question of whether it makes the transport system more or less resilient because it's reliant on electricity. And also, I think the challenge is that as we move towards more electrification in transport, can we get the charging infrastructure out there in scale to deliver, and not just for the car network where the majority of people, if they're fortunate enough to have a drive or a garage or whatever, can charge at home, but for those big vehicles, those lorries, those buses, etc., that need significant amounts of power and probably quite a lot of it in depots and the like. So I think there's some real challenges to understand around that space if we're going to move forward and have that smooth transition towards decarbonised electric road transport.
Thanks very much for that, Phil. I'm going to dive into some questions straight away, and I've got a question for David from the Energy Networks Association. What are the big steps forward, in your view, in modernising Britain's electricity networks that have already been achieved, but also what are the next, or the remaining next big focuses for you?
So I think, yeah, big steps that have already happened. I mentioned a few kind of kicking things off. The move into flexibility across the system has been very pronounced and is a critical component of a modern grid. Connect at distribution level and increasing the transmission, connections will be offered not just on a firm, lots of reinforcement, always on assumption, but on a flexible basis that's tailored with lots of different products and services for different customers. The automation and the degree of data and monitoring and improved control systems really has been a step change already in the last few decades. So some of those kind of building blocks are some of the big achievements that have happened to date. Where we're at now, I'd say looking forward, there's two big focuses for the modern grid. One is, well, it's probably three I'd call out. One is the connections reform that and focus, particularly at a large scale. Historically, it has been first come, first served. It's been entirely market driven rather than coordinated in any way with system needs or the decarbonization objective. That's transitioning. That's a big change, but it is transitioning. So getting to prioritize and get the customers on to the network that are in the connections queue that are ready and needed is a world that we need to get to. There's a huge amount of work going on to do exactly that. But there's big lifting to do and big change therein. The second one also is relatively connections related, but if we think about the electrification, particularly of heat and of transport, what that will look like is large volumes of smaller and quite distinct changes in the system. There'll be the connection applications or changes to where infrastructure is required, etc. So that other lower level system focus and on modernizing the investment approaches, the high volume, high efficiency approach to connection processes, that's the second big focus that is critical to support net zero. There has been some good work on that already. So for example, all the networks at distribution level for residential low carbon technology connections, they have a single digital portal that the ENA now hosts on behalf of all the DNOs. So all customers naturally can do that digitally in one place. Artificial intelligence helps with asset recognition and triaging of the application. So that's an important thing. That's the kind of thing we need to keep doing more of. And finally, resilience is kind of in the title of the subject of the session. It's definitely not something we can take for granted, and continuing to focus both on how, as the use of the system changes, we should be thinking differently in terms of resilience and planning, response, etc. And also as climate change does actually happen to us, is already happening to us, what adaptability, what kind of major event preventative measures and planning do we need to have in place? Those are probably the three big focuses looking forward in terms of modernizing the grid.
Thanks, David. I'm going to come to Phil in a second around some of those resilience challenges, because I know it's work that DARE have been undertaking, and also gathering together best practice and information around that with a view to sharing it with those who need it. But I just want to move to Peter Ridge first. Peter, you spoke about the importance of integrating across the multiple users, the stakeholders involved in all of this, and multiple disciplines and sectors, your concept of joining the dots. How is that, though, going to accelerate, speed up the development of a resilient and efficient modern grid that meets the ever-evolving needs of society?
Yes, good question. I mean, something that just struck me when we were talking there about resilience. I was thinking of some of our customers. I've just mentioned data center customers, so I've got them in mind. Typically they connect to very, very resilient networks already, as in the electricity network. But most of them do have backup generation, which is very substantial. So they back up most of their campuses, even though the grid is very resilient, and that's all to do with service level agreements. So they usually want uptime of 5 nines, as we say. So that means almost no downtime. So the risk of interruption to them is far greater than the cost of all the generation. But we have all this generation sat there. A lot of it's diesel generation, which is not very green, but it does sit there and it doesn't do anything. There are some initiatives and some things we looked at with customers, for example, where maybe we've removed some of those generators because we've proved the resilience within the grid, or going further down, they have sort of uninterruptible power supply systems, which are needed for very fast response when there's outages on the grid. And then actually we've been able to utilize those installed assets for grid stabilization as well, and fast acting responses to grid. So I guess they're just some examples of how a customer with installed assets which serve its purpose, if it's done in a very clever way without affecting the customer's requirements, can actually support back into the grid. That might offset some additional BESS storage projects, or in essence, it is joining some of those dots.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Just turning to Phil Blythe on this. From your perspective, what are the key challenges involved in making transport infrastructure more resilient while decarbonising? And what are maybe the risks involved, as well as the drive for electrification increases?
Okay, well, the challenge with resilience, when we think about the impact of extremes of climate-induced weather, is they are going to get much more extreme going forward. As part of the DARE project, we're producing predictive models jointly between my team in Newcastle and the Met Office about what the extremes, what the highs of climate weather may well be in the future. And what we're seeing is it's going to come harder, it's going to come faster, and it's going to be combinations. Like you might have very dry followed by very wet followed by very windy weather all coming close together. And a lot of our infrastructures are designed to cope with one at a time. And the whole idea of resilience is it doesn't mean it's robust and won't fail, but if it does fail, it will recover quickly. And some of the more critical infrastructure is designed to be robust enough that it will never fail. But the cost of making infrastructures that fail safe are astronomical, as you know. So it's trying to understand what are the levels of extreme climate that we have to design against going forward, and make sure that we can design our infrastructure to be resilient and accept that beyond that level, that infrastructure will fail and it should recover. It should repair and recover, but the risk is infrastructures may well be in the wrong place, and over time it may be that you cannot protect that infrastructure sufficiently. And I think seeing some of the extremes like what happened in Valencia last week, where they got some like 800 liters of rain per square meter up in the mountains, all running down into the city, really has jeopardized lives, sadly, and really damaged infrastructure. And I think the challenge going forward is we need to know where that infrastructure is. If you're building lots of charging infrastructure in places which are near landslips or close to where it's going to flood, you lose your transport refueling capability, which you really do need in that emergency when you're trying to recover from this. So it's having that system thinking, understanding that broader context of where there's transport, where does recovery, where does resilience, where does the energy system that will be providing most of the energy for transport actually sit, and how can we ensure that those systems will work in those complex environments when we really are dealing with the mega extremes of climate change. We've not really been thinking, because there's a lot of money associated with that, and in a way the energy sector is blessed because you are a regulated environment. You mentioned 43 billion being put into the electricity system at the moment. We don't have that sort of regulation in transport, so it's a bit more Wild West, where part of it's government, part of it's local authorities, a lot of it is private companies trying to make those decisions, and that guiding mind isn't there. So one of the points of the DARE hub is to try and provide that convening role, engaging government and all the other stakeholders together to really work out what do we need to go forward in terms of adapting to what is happening now, the levels of resilience we're looking at, and also achieving our goals of climate change. But as I say, some of the things we're doing for decarbonisation may not make our systems as resilient as they could be.
Thanks very much, Phil, for that. I just want to go back to David, and just picking up on this theme of resilience. I mean, how is that being looked at and focused on by network operators? How engaged are they around that kind of issue? I would imagine it should be pretty high on their list of priorities.
Very much so. Very much so. I guess a few things that practically are, what does that mean for the electricity network operators? So you mentioned around the event of Valencia, flood defenses is an area that has been a kind of an investment focus amongst the networks, but I think we can all see that that's not one that's going away, or that we can kind of tick a box and move on. Those events are becoming more regular and more severe. So, one of the practical things is, what do you design? What's your standard in terms of events, in terms of resilience that you design and invest to? Because flood defenses in many ways are very practical, simple, straightforward things to build. They're lots of concrete. They're investing in substations to ensure that they remain robust and operable in those kinds of events. Another practical thing that comes not so much on floods, but also on high winds, is around the overhead line design standards and layouts and operational management. So as an example, all the networks regularly review and look at their vegetation management, which is cutting back the trees that would take that line down in a storm or a high wind event. That's one area of focus. Innovation programs turned those from manual surveys into being prioritized based on LiDAR overhead flights and kind of more extensive data surveys to inform where to cut, where was highest risk. Those are practical things that have been done already. But then you start to get into some interesting challenges that we need to focus on, that are environmental and policy, operational policy kind of considerations. So, for example, we could use drones to do more inspections, but you can't fly drones outside of line of sight. So you can only use drones to look at the things you can already see in this country, which is a bit of a silly context, or missed opportunity anyway. Another thing that we find difficult, and as one of our big priorities, not just for resilience, but also for capacity purposes, is that investing in upgrading our infrastructure typically triggers planning approvals, and those are very long, expensive processes. We could put more poles in with shorter spans that would be more robust to high events, but that would take several years and lots of money and planning, and probably being with lots of challenge because of all of the network. Effectively, over 90% of the network's on third-party land. So those are a few of the focus areas that we have, and a few of the practical issues that we're really focused on to look at ways we can continue to improve system resilience.
Thanks, David, for those comments. I just want to turn back to Peter Ridge from Cundall, and just coming back to this, to your concept of joining things up and linking things up. You spoke about intelligence, and I think data is probably part of this as well. But how can layering intelligence, of which you spoke, such as grid capacity, land suitability, smart grid capability, etc., how can that optimize energy projects and also enhance collaboration between large energy customers and also renewable energy providers? How can we make those connections?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing, just talking about resilience and extreme weather. One layer of intelligence, I guess, is understanding those areas that are high risk and at a lower risk. So yeah, understanding all the different needs and moving parts can help to plan, more intelligently. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. Other elements, I guess, of the layering of the intelligence is there's lots of people now, I think, who understand grid capacities around the country, which is largely driven by open data portals and whatnot from utility grids and stuff, which is great because this all enhances innovation. So it requires us all to lay our intelligence on. So, for example, at Cundall, we have people who are experts in planning, so we can layer some of our planning excellence onto the grid capacity issues. But then we also have people who are expertise in sort of ground and geology and stuff, so we can look at where where the land is right for certain types of projects as well. And then we can add some other things on there, such as client types and client requirements. So we do have some like large landowner clients and customers, and they may be looking for energy projects, for example. And then it's all these different layers of intelligence that we can bring together, and something that we don't want to just do as a business, but also do as a sector, where we bring those things together to come up with optimal locations for some of these projects. And understanding all the risks and constraints, which will ultimately help to accelerate these various different projects.
Thanks very much for that. Just going back to Phil, one of the big things that occurs to me, and it's something we're going to be discussing in more detail tomorrow around skills and also capacity and also diversity. There's obviously quite a big responsibility on the industry in its widest sense, including specific parts of the industry as represented by Peter and also David. But in your view, is the industry that is going to be charged with delivering a lot of this stuff, is it up for the challenge? Do we need some extra work in that area? And maybe organizations like DARE in terms of kind of bringing together best practice and collaboration are actually assisting in that effort in making the industry better place to actually do what it needs to do in order that we can actually achieve what we need to achieve on this question?
That's a really good question, Andy. Obviously, the whole issue around decarbonisation and how we adapt and make our systems resilient to that, so society continue, the economy can continue, it is, when you unravel it, is a really, really complex system of systems, whereas we used to think about transport system or even a transport mode almost in its own silo, and we used to think about how we refuel it or how we provide energy for it in different silos, and the things never connected. But this is essentially all one system or a bunch of systems sitting within another system. So I think we need people to understand that complexity and understand that systems approach, so they see the wider picture and see how decisions they make or decisions they don't make or funding they make or funding decisions not to fund will have impacts on other parts of the network, because they're not all individual separate entities. They all are impacted on each other. So you think about a few years ago, we had Storm Arwen in the northeast of England and Scotland, which took out a lot of the electricity supply system. It meant a lot of rural communities had no connection. They couldn't communicate. Their mobile phones wouldn't work. They didn't know when they're going to be reconnected. Roads were not accessible, but people didn't know that because until people got to that point, they didn't realize that there was 10 trees down there. And it's actually making sure that we understand the whole of the issues there and what we can do in the short term to help people to recover and what can we do in the long term. And I think the other challenge around that in terms of thinking about the system is it's expensive when things fail. It has the obvious impact that service doesn't work. There's costs to recover it and repair it, but there's costs across the whole of society, the whole of economy of this. We were looking as part of DARE at one rail failure, a viaduct in the northeast of England that failed last year, and that impacted on rail services and freight services in the southwest of England. Never guessed on that. And when you put all those costs together, it's absolutely massive. Now, at the moment, if that happens once every 10 years, we say, oh, that's unfortunate. We'll learn from that and we'll just absorb the cost within the ecosystem. But if those failures start happening every couple of years or every year or even several times a year, you can't ignore those costs. They're going to become prohibitive, and we've got to really think about how do we solve that whole systems problem, which is almost unbounded to some extent. And this is where we need that wider thinking. This is where I think the training and the education and sectors talking to each other really, really comes in and is critical. That's why events like this are so important, Andy.
Thanks very much. Just turning to David again on that capacity building and training. I mean, is that something that your organisation is keenly aware of and also aware of the need to actually do something about it?
So as the ENA, we definitely relay the position of the networks on this, and networks are very, very clear and really recognize and emphasize the importance of skills in terms of how we can collectively respond to the challenge that resilience we have in resilience areas, and just the steps and the effort taken that we need to take to get to net zero targets. Our very high level message, I think, Phil, your points about it's not an isolated thing, so we shouldn't think of it in an isolated way in terms of there's one set of training programs for network apprentices and that's the answer. No, it's a much broader skill set. We're talking about customer service skills, we're talking about the supply chain skills, the whole end-to-end ecosystem is important. So Network's very supportive of any initiative that across the energy space, because it is all interactive. Our message, we sent this into both the National Infrastructure Commission on network readiness and to the regulator when we're looking ahead to the next price control period, is the clarity of the strategic plans and the policy decisions that then can give us clarity on investment programs are the way in which we believe that will replicate down into skills, into supply chain. If networks place a single order with, or in bulk, long term, billions of pounds of investment, then the supply chain will receive that order directly, and the supply chain will invest in its capacity to do that. It'll invest in its resourcing to deliver that. Networks can train their apprentices and train their staff up to the workforce scale needed to do that. That all comes from the strategic clarity and the support for that strategic clarity being put into investment. So that's our really clear message on this topic, both to the regulator, but also just generally, as Phil says, across the whole energy ecosystem.
Thanks, David, for that. I just want to go back to Peter Ridge at Cundall. So we spoke a little bit there about skills and capacity, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail, I think, in tomorrow's session. But you talked about collaboration, and obviously, given the stakeholders involved in and around this issue, that's got to be collaboration, multidisciplinary, really. So when we look at that aim of multidisciplinary collaboration to create innovative solutions for the modern grid, do you see any challenges in that? Presumably there are some, and how do we overcome the barriers that are undoubtedly there to effectively connect what are quite diverse sectors and expertise?
Yes, yeah, quite right. Well, it's that siloed operations. I think I heard that on one of the discussions this morning as well. So disciplines and sectors, sectors, often do operate independently, leading to that, fragmented effort and missed opportunities. There can sometimes be, of course, communication barriers as well in those different areas, regulatory hurdles we keep talking to. Sometimes there are resistance to change as well. That's another sort of challenge and barrier, and that's understanding, stakeholders, they have hesitance for new technologies or methodologies or whatnot, for lots of reasons, because lots of people are very invested in what they do and what they've done before. But there is opportunities, innovation through diversity. So multidisciplinary collaboration, brings the the various perspectives and expertise together, and that does foster the innovative solutions. So that's something that is very important, that we don't have these isolated disciplines. So yeah, that's something that we always look at on any sort of, if you like, a project level. It's all about multidisciplinary teams and collaboration. It's similar as well with resource as well, because there are lots of skills shortages. So we do need that collaborative efforts as well, so we can pool resources and the skills and the knowledge together. And ultimately, I guess it is that diversity that brings the holistic problem solving. That's what we need to look at from the get-go, is how we think about things differently, how we can do things differently. And then I guess that's leading on to how do we overcome those barriers. So sometimes it sounds like we go back to basics, but we do need to keep bashing the drum. So certainly we do have to promote open communication. Establish regular forums, workshops, collaborative platforms, just like Phil said. Multidisciplinary teams are very, very important, as we've talked about. Certainly leveraging technology. I think that's something that we have to do. Data sharing is very, very important. We just talked before about the open data portals on utilities, and that's allowed, if you like, third parties, you could say, such as myself and others, who can come in and innovate. Utilities have got a very, very hard challenge. They've got billions and billions of people, trying to apply for services, and they only have a finite resource, and there's only a certain way they can look at connections. So, by opening data up, other people can look at optimization. They can look across sectors and across disciplines and across skills to come up with something different. So that's a key point for me as well. Policy and regulatory alignment. Let's say we've talked we talked about that. So we do advocate for the policies and the supporting multidiscipline collaboration, and we do have large hopes that the likes of NISO will look at that in a different way and bring something to us. And you could talk about sort of incentivize that collaboration as well. So can we incentivize teams and organizations to engage in the multidisciplinary projects? That's a good question. Is that one way of bringing people together? How do we do that?
Thanks very much, Peter. I just want to come back to David for a second. Then I want to finish with something to Phil. But David, obviously, as an organisation which represents every major electricity network operator in the UK, so no pressure there really. We're talking here about the building resilient systems. We're talking about the modern grid. I mean, for your members, what does the modern grid actually look like? It's going to evolve in the future. What should people expect? How will they kind of experience that evolving grid, particularly from a customer side and a stakeholder side? And what do they need to be aware of going forward in that?
Yeah, nice and light and straightforward question. I think a few of the things. I mean, first and foremost, at a more general level, it's a more active grid is one thing to say. I think historically, the grid was something you took for granted. It was a kind of an infinite service provision that was a static service provision. So those aren't true, right? We know that the customer needs are evolving. Customers are more active, both in terms of how they minimize or get the most value out of their energy costs and energy assets. And also, as we transition into a low carbon world and more customers do so and decarbonize, then that won't be a single copy and paste service for all customers in terms of what they need from their grid to support their energy needs and their decarbonization. So it's a more active a role in the sector. It'll be, and with that comes a need for more active customer service, more active engagement, more active relationships. So I think that's from a customer perspective. What I'd really call out is what I think that all the networks are kind of focused on and moving to, and will be necessary, a key component of the modern grid.
Just want to turn to Phil. There's a lot of talk here about collaboration, and I know that's something that obviously is very much baked into the DNA of your organisation and your work. Just tell us why we should be optimistic that collaboration is taking place, and that knowledge sharing is actually going to bear fruit. And maybe give us just a couple of examples of some of the work that you're doing that will kind of make us think, well, yeah, absolutely, this is real, it's going to happen, and we're going to get there.
Okay, well, as a national hub, I think DARE is a convening body. We're tasked with bringing all the key expertise in the UK on resilience, on decarbonising of transport, on the related infrastructure such as energy and communications, making sure they all understand that. So part of what we're doing is bringing government departments together to talk about this and look where they're not really considering resilience in the right way, or whether they're going down some decarbonisation paths which may not deliver resilience, and some of the issues around decarbonised materials for building infrastructure. We don't know how long they're going to last, whether they're actually going to be as resilient as those we already have, or can we keep existing infrastructure running for longer so we're not adding to the carbon footprint of a new build. So we're quite confident that the conversations in government, you're hearing the word resilience used an awful lot more than we did a year ago. I think there's still a long way to go, but people are beginning to understand that if they don't get it right, the costs associated with it are absolutely massive. And the fact that I think the extremes of weather that we will see as climate change kicks in will mean that these episodes that could affect our infrastructure are going to happen more and more often, means that we really do need to bottom out how do we take this forward. what are those hard decisions we make about maybe having to leave some infrastructure behind because we can't make it robust enough or resilient enough, and making sure that those critical infrastructures, of which energy is a key part of that for the whole of society and the economy, is as resilient as it can be and will deliver for the other sectors that rely on it. Because without energy, we don't have a society at the end of the day.
Thanks very much indeed, Phil. And I think that's actually quite an apposite point to finish on. And, I think, the theme of this event, I just add another word on that as well. And that was without sustainable energy, we don't have a society probably, worth, worth having. So, let's hope that, we continue to keep on track in terms of the aims that we need to achieve, and also that that current geopolitical events, of which I won't mention at this stage, don't throw us off track either, because it's clear, just looking at some of the comments that are coming through around those developments at the moment, that this issue is more important than it's ever been, and is actually key in order to I think galvanizing people around a shared understanding of doing what needs to be done going forward. So I just want to thank our panelists in this final session of today: David Bower from the Energy Networks Association, Peter Ridge from our sponsors Cundall, and also Professor Phil Blythe, the director at DARE, for their contributions and their open conversation during the course of this session. And that kind of ends our second day of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. Do join us again tomorrow, when we'll be focusing on the all-important, increasingly important issue of skills and diversity, where, amongst other things, we'll be looking at how we create a more inclusive energy sector and look at how diversity can help to catalyse groundbreaking solutions for a sustainable future. We start at 9 a.m. in the morning with our opening session, and I hope to see you all then. But for now, once again, thanks to all of our panelists, thanks to all of our attendees today at Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week, and we'll see you tomorrow bright and early at 9 a.m. Thanks a lot.